I thought long and hard about this, and the truth is, it felt like the room was never built to hold me without breaking me.
Hello and welcome to the Virtually Anything Goes podcast. This episode is part of our Leadership Stories series, where we speak to leaders from a variety of different backgrounds, including AI, healthcare, technology, strategy, executive coaching, and others. And if you like what you hear in this episode, be sure to subscribe and check out our other episodes too. Today, I'm talking to Jacynth Ivey MBE about her story into leadership, what got her to where she is today, and which obstacles she encountered along the way. Jacynth is a multi-award-winning transformational leader, a non-executive director in the UK's National Health Service for the Birmingham NHS Foundation Trust, as well as the author of the book, It's Okay to be Different, 7 Steps to Acknowledge Your Brilliance. And if that wasn't enough, in 2024, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales recognised Jacynth for her services to nursing by awarding her an MBE, a Member of the Order of the British Empire. Of course, I will be asking Jacynth about that and what it was like to meet Prince William. Jacynth Ivey MBE, very warm welcome to you. It's wonderful to have you on the show.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me.
It's wonderful to have you. And if this is your first time listening to the Virtually Anything Goes podcast, stick around until the very end when I turn control over to Jacynth and she can ask me her Virtually Anything Goes question. This can be any question at all, and I won't know what it is until Jacynth asks me the question. So it could literally be anything. The only caveat is that once I've given my answer, Jacynth will then also have to give her answer to the same question. So Jacynth, that is quite a lot of achievements, and I've only just mentioned really the most recent ones. And from that overview, our listeners may be forgiven to think that you were born into privilege. But your story started quite differently. Your parents, Maurice and Carmen Brown, were part of the Windrush generation and came to the UK from Jamaica in 1952. You yourself were born in the UK after your parents settled here. What can you tell us about the young Jacynth? What was she like and what did she experience?
Young Jacynth almost feels a long way ago, but actually, I can remember elements of the young Jacynth. I think she was playful, or I know she was playful. She was happy. She was loved. Yeah, I had an amazing childhood in a really loving family. I'm the youngest of 5 children,
Okay.
and it was a really loving family. My grandmother also lived with us for part of that. And it's interesting how you remember, or how I remember, the good times, but also when I reflect, and there were some really challenging points in my life. But when I just think about my family environment, it was loving, it was caring, it was kind, it was warm, and it was really, really welcoming.
That sounds wonderful. And if you think back to those sort of early years, how do you think that early part of your life shaped you as a person, and which aspects of your early life do you think have carried through to today?
Yes. So I always say my story started before I was born. So it started with my parents' decision to come to the UK, and their unexpected, unwanted experiences, challenges, and the discrimination that they faced. So I think that's really helped to shape me today. And it's amazing how they coped in an environment that was so hostile to them, one that perhaps many listeners will never understand. And they, like others, were the epitome of resilience. They learned to be resourceful. They knew how to build supportive networks in order to survive the hostility. But I think one of the most important messages that we heard growing up, and certainly one of the messages that I absorbed growing up, was the need to work hard. Now you can imagine as a child, working hard was kind of, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to play. I wanted to play and I wanted to continue to have fun with my siblings. But we were kind of encouraged to work harder than anyone else, and that we needed to do that in order to stand still. So I didn't understand that at the time. As my parents told us stories about their experiences, and that actually said that if you came from our background, our culture, our ethnicity, our heritage, that actually life wasn't fair, and that we needed to work harder, than our colleagues, our friends who were born and raised here, if we wanted to end up in the same position or if indeed we wanted to progress. So eventually I understood that story through my own experiences. Eventually I understood that story, and I understood that that story is not the same for many today. But that's one of the things that often resonates in the back of me, that Jacynth, you do have to work a little bit harder. You do have to do things a little bit differently in order to be seen, to be heard, and to progress.
It's interesting that you said you had to work harder to stand
Yeah.
still. You clearly haven't stood still, so you've worked, by the looks of it, extremely hard to get to where you are today. So, how long? You mentioned that you eventually understood that. What age was that? When did you begin to kind of realize and understand what that meant?
Well, that's interesting. So my first lesson that always resonates with me was in primary school, and I had a friend. So there weren't very many people who looked like me in primary school, hardly any. And one of my friends, her and I used to do our maths together during class, and she went up first, and the teacher praised her and said how wonderful she was. She sat down. I went up after, and we'd done this exactly the same. And he looked at me, put a line through it, and said, "You'll never be any good at maths, and you'll never make anything of yourself." And that resonated, excuse me, with me throughout my life. And so, as a consequence, anytime there's anything to do with maths, I'd just automatically say, "I'm no good. I can't do maths.
Mm.
This isn't for me." And and one day, my husband said to me, you've got to stop telling yourself this story because it's not true. You've got to stop telling yourself this story. And when I reflected back and I realized, well, I could do maths. I had to do it through my nurse training. I did it for my O levels. I was supporting my children with their maths. So it's amazing how some of those early messages,
Mm.
yeah, really resonate, really stay with you, and can have an amazing impact on the things that you think about yourself and your ability.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting and incredibly clearly impactful. And it's applicable to, I suppose, any child, really, isn't it? These early experiences and how important they are. But I guess
Yeah,
on the back of your story as well, in particular,
yeah.
looking back, was that already for you a lesson in leadership, or was it just a lesson in life in terms of leadership and how the teacher was treating you, or did you have your own sort of what's the first leadership lesson you can remember
Mhm.
that whether you realized it at the time was the lesson or not, but something that you
Yeah,
recall from an early
I mean
early
that
phase?
certainly was one of the lessons, but I think my first leadership lesson probably came out of feeling quite alone as a child. Now, that kind of almost contradicts what I was saying earlier about having a really fun childhood, and I did. And as I said, I was the youngest of five children.
Mm.
There was a 3-year age gap between myself and the next sibling, and months between them. And so the four of them were very close in age and did everything together. So I often played by myself and had that sense of isolation. But actually, what that did was force me to find my own voice,
Hmm.
force me to be resilient from a young age. I'm sure my siblings didn't quite like that. And I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who I loved dearly. She gave me comfort and wisdom and that sense of belonging, which balanced some of the harder experiences that I faced. And so from an early age, I learned what it meant to be seen as different. I learned through some of the derogatory name calling, which was the norm. I've given one example from my childhood, but also I vividly remember a child calling me, a teacher, apologies, calling me wild and woolly because I couldn't pronounce a German a German word. And some of those words, some of the experiences could have crushed me. But instead, actually, I think that they really lit a fire inside of me. And I thought, I'm going to prove everybody wrong. So I think my first leadership lesson was about being resilient. It was about courage, tenacity, all of those things. And I learned that actually, no matter how others label you, how others identify you. You have to decide for yourself who you are and who and what you will become. And that lesson has never left me. And it's one of the most important questions I asked my client is a question that I learned to answer is, who am I? And it's a really important lesson to really learn to understand because we often describe ourselves in relation to the roles that we undertake or maybe our demographics. You know, I'm a woman, I'm this age, I'm this ethnicity. But that question of who am I is a truly deep question
Mhm.
and a lesson that we all need to learn to answer.
Yeah.
Question we all need to learn to answer.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you make around learning early on about resilience, because it's, even as adults, sometimes we don't quite learn it, do we? And to learn it at that and at such a young age, it must have been quite impactful for you to realize that then, and that for that to be one of the first lessons you learned and the first things you learned actually. So the young Jacynth grows up and enters the workplace. I sort of briefly touched on what you do at the moment, but how do you choose your early career, and what was it?
Fell into my early career. Actually, careers advice at school was, I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but it was kind of non-existent for me. And my careers advice at the time was actually I could either go and work in a typing pool, I could work in a shop, or I could work in a factory. Now, none of those was going to be my career choice. My mum was a senior lecturer, and my father was undertaking his master's. Education was really, really important in our household. So they just weren't career choices. School wasn't somewhere that I enjoyed, Lev. It just wasn't somewhere that I enjoyed at all. And so I didn't do well at school in terms of my qualifications, much to the disappointment of my parents. I didn't do well at all. I left early, much to the disappointment of my parents. I ended up on the dole, much to the disappointment of my
There's a
parents.
recurring theme here, Jacynth.
Which was, yeah, absolutely recurring theme. And one day my father said to me, things have got to change. You have got to find yourself a job. And so I did. I went into a nursing. I applied for nursing. I was fortunate to get through in the first round. A lot of my friends and people around me were applying to three, four, five different hospitals. I applied to one hospital and got through, irrespective of actually some of the things that were said. So my father had said to me, do general nursing and do not take anything but your registered nursing. And I was told things like, well, girls like you do very well looking after older people, or girls like you do very well in mental health. And I can just remember my father's voice resonating, saying, no, general nursing, adult nursing, that's what you will do. And so that's what I did, again, having to push through. And at interview, being asked things like, well, what do your parents do? And what did that matter? But anyway, I kind of pushed through and did my nursing. I absolutely love nursing. I kind of found my place
Mhm.
in life in doing nursing, which wasn't a career that I had thought about. It wasn't an initial career of choice. It was just a case of I went into nursing because I had to. And so I did my general nursing, absolutely loved it. I decided I wanted to work in the community. So I went and I did my midwifery. Absolutely love that, working as a midwife, delivering hundreds of babies.
Mhm.
And that is it's a real honor, yeah, to be a nurse,
Yeah.
to be a midwife. And then I decided I wanted to go and work in the community. And that out of probably all of my career was the most rewarding, working in inner city areas where women and families were really struggling to understand the system, really struggling to do the best that they could for their babies and for their children. And I felt privileged to be able to support them along that along that journey. So I think nursing irrespective of what I've done subsequently, has been absolutely my foundation and my rock on
Mm.
which I've built my career.
It's fascinating because obviously I touched on it during the introduction. In 2024, that led to you being awarded an MBE for those services to nursing. 24 years before that, in 2000, you became the first black executive director of nursing, or chief nurse at the time, and that was in the West Midlands for the Solihull Primary Care Trust. And the fact that you achieved that role was obviously testament to your professionalism and your dedication. But I guess it also indicates, if you were the first in the year 2000, the first black woman to have that role, there must have been also some obstacles for other women to achieve that. Can you tell us a bit more about what you encountered along the way?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Being the first and the only is incredibly challenging. And there were definitely obstacles along the way. Some of them were quite significant. I must add that not all of my career was a struggle. However, there were obstacles and barriers. They were all around. And I think I became quite adept at maneuvering around them, over them, through them. And perhaps my many years in athletics helped me to become a little bit more agile. But being a Black woman in a senior leadership position meant that I was often overlooked. I think my abilities at times were often underestimated. There were questions like, "Well, actually, was my appointment tokenistic?" Which I would really, refute and reject. I had worked incredibly hard to get to where I'd got to. So I'd be overlooked. I felt I was judged more harshly than others. For example, I would get asked more questions, um, such as I'd get asked, "Well, are you the executive director?" I'd get asked that a number of times as if I'd got it wrong. Um, I'd experience microaggressions on a regular basis. For example, comments on how I dressed, being ignored in conversations, being talked over, deliberately left out of emails and meetings that I should have been a part of. Um, I remember being continually questioned about why I had taken particular decisions or why I had been asked to attend perhaps a national meeting, as though somehow my presence needed extra justification. So those experiences had a real impact on me. And at times I felt isolated. And I talked earlier about my earlier childhood,
Mm.
about feeling isolated and feeling different. And I could feel myself withdrawing and becoming quieter and almost becoming invisible in spaces where I should have had a strong voice. But
Mm.
one of the challenges was it a challenge, was actually other nurses, other people who looked like me were looking to me for support, looking for me as a role model. And behind all of that, there was an element of imposter syndrome because I was experiencing anxiety. I was experiencing anxiety on the way to work, sometimes in the workplace itself, always wondering what I was going to face that day. So that's the unseen toll of microaggressions. And
Mm.
that's not a term I really like because actually it's not micro. It's often described as death by a thousand cuts. The exclusion, they chip away all the time at your or they chipped away at my confidence and making me question, do I really belong? Can I really take my whole self into the workplace? And so I believe that I had three choices. Um, One was to leave, which at the time wasn't an option, to stay and do nothing, which wasn't an option because it was really impacting on my emotional and mental health, or to do something different. So I chose to face those barriers. Every time somebody questioned my ability or I faced another microaggression, I kind of stood tall and really had to demonstrate my capability.
Mm.
I began to understand the strategy. I honed the art of things like strategic networking, navigating organizational politics. And when I faced those barriers, I took a deep breath before I took the opportunity to educate and to challenge. And so I now use these experiences and strategies that I developed to support others to transform themselves and the organizations. And so these personal challenges became growth points. They taught me resilience, and yes, it's that word again.
Mm.
And they taught me adaptability and the real importance of not letting external voices drown out my inner conviction and my inner thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, everything you talk about talks really has a subtext of learning and building resilience and learning to adapt because perhaps the normal rules don't necessarily apply or the usual rules, and I can see how that would develop you as a person and your character and your personality with that as well. And I mean, you said earlier that it wasn't your career progression wasn't always hard, but also I suppose it wasn't necessarily a steady linear one either. Do you recall a conversation that changed the trajectory of your career, an individual conversation that you had, whether it was from the nurses that looked to you when you were in leadership, or was it already before that? Do you recall anything?
So my career for the first probably 10, 15 years was fairly straightforward. Fairly straightforward. As I said, I was a nurse, a midwife, a health visitor. Absolutely loved all of that journey. Um, but there was a time when I kind of made a decision that I wanted to advance in my career. I wanted to do something differently. I wanted to move higher. And so it was almost when that decision was made by myself, my career trajectory became kind of more scrambled, it became knotty, and the obstacles began to present themselves. They could have been there earlier, I don't know, but I didn't necessarily feel or see them. So interestingly, the turning point certainly wasn't a conversation that I was expecting. I was encouraged to go on a positive action program, which was aimed at Black and minority ethnic staff. And I remember at first I was really upset because I felt it was a remedial program, almost as if something was wrong with me that
Mm.
needed fixing. Whilst my white colleague, who I worked with very closely, was offered a master's program. So I couldn't understand why I wasn't offered a master's program, but I was offered this, what I perceived to be a remedial program. Um, but what I came to realize, actually, it wasn't about me being deficient. It was actually about a system not being ready for someone like me. I went on that program, and it was the turning point of my career, actually. It gave me the tools, it gave me confidence. I was in a room for the first time full of people that looked like me, being taught, being supported by senior women of color who looked like me, who were of color, who had managed to navigate some of those knotty places, who
Mm.
had managed to navigate their career into senior leadership positions. And that really helped me to see that actually my difference was not a weakness, it was actually my strength. And looking back, that was the moment that shifted my trajectory. It gave me a new perspective on myself as a leader. It gave me a new perspective on how I could use my position to open the doors for others. I'm a real believer in that notion of, and we have all heard it, the lift as you climb. And there's an African philosophy of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And that's a way of life that promotes that social awareness and responsibility. So that conversation, that opportunity, it was an opportunity that at first I thought was a remedial opportunity. It was that opportunity that helped me to shift in my career and really helped me to understand how to navigate through my career to where I am today.
I've got so many questions about this. The person who suggested you should go on that program, was it their intention? Had they seen? Did they see that this would be the outcome for you, or was their intention perhaps the remedial side of things?
Would have loved them. I would have loved to think that actually they saw the potential that this is a great way forward. Actually, it was something that had landed on their door, on their desk that morning.
Right.
So it was a flyer that had landed on their desk that morning, and they just thought, Jacynth, perhaps she'd like to go and do this, as it's for people from Black and minority ethnic communities.
Right.
So that's what she told me. So there was there didn't appear to be any thought about my career trajectory. Certainly, there wasn't the option of you could do this or you could do the master's course, which is being offered to your colleagues.
Yeah. And what do you think? That was my other question. What do you think your progression or your life would be like if you'd gone for the masters instead of this course? Have you ever thought about that?
It's an interesting question. Um, I don't know how different it would be, but I even now I can hear my parents' voice, particularly my father, resonating in me that you need to work harder.
Mm.
But also I saw my mother kind of navigate her career from being told actually she wanted to be a teacher and being told go away and have babies to actually becoming a senior lecturer at Oxford Brookes University to being the first Black social worker to sitting on a commission which developed the first Race Relations Act. So my parents had really pushed through, and so in a way, it wasn't going to be an option for me. I would have to learn to navigate. So yeah,
Mm.
I just got perhaps learn some of the tools more quickly and more strategically through this program.
Yeah, interesting, really interesting. And you work with leaders from a range of different backgrounds, and you also speak. I mean, you mentioned this. I think you touched on it earlier. You speak on diversity and inclusion. You speak on women empowerment. Um, what do you encounter most when you coach people that they struggle with when it comes to becoming a leader or succeeding as a leader? What do you see from the clients that you work with?
For a lot of the clients that come to me, so I work predominantly with women, and women from minoritized group, and there are a number of things. So externally, many women, including those from minoritized groups, still face what we call the glass ceiling, struggling to maneuver their careers. And in some cases, this is not a glass ceiling at all. It feels more like a concrete
Mm.
ceiling. And so breaking through can take an enormous amount of effort, both emotional, physical, and psychological effort. And it's not just about entering leadership, it's having the support to stay there. And so in coaching, it's often around, what are the strategies that women have to embrace in order to stay where they are, but not only to survive, but it's about thriving.
Mm.
And one of the other challenges is what I call that tall poppy syndrome. So being the only one sometimes in that space. And the moment that you stand out, particularly when you're considered different, when you're the first, everything that you do is magnified. And so you can't afford to make a mistake, unlike your colleagues, because there's a sense that everybody knows who you are, even if they don't know your name. They'll find a way of describing you. And often leaders will tell me that they struggle with visibility. And I coach them through this because actually we can be visible for the wrong reasons.
Mm.
And what I really support women around and coach them around is how to be visible for the right reasons in the right ways, how to step into places and spaces with confidence without feeling ultra exposed, without that feeling of isolation. The other area is around ownership of their journey. So too often leaders feel that they're at the mercy of the system. They're, waiting for permission, waiting for somebody to perhaps tap them on that shoulder, and that tap is never going to come. Waiting for recognition, waiting for an opportunity. I hear about people saying, well, I'm waiting for my manager to tell me that I'm ready for that next move. And indeed, that often never arises. So, one of the most powerful shifts is when you realize that you can exist and you can create opportunities on your own terms rather than being pushed out, being burnt out, which is something I've lived and experienced. And so I encourage others to embrace. So, staying is not about survival. It's about strategy. It's about building allies, nurturing resilience, reminding yourself daily that actually you belong in the room. And so the struggles are real, breaking through, staying in a system that perhaps doesn't recognize or acknowledge your brilliance, but also knowing when to walk. And I remember being asked, why did you leave? You were an executive director, the first Black chief nurse in the West Midlands. And I thought long and hard about this. And the truth is, it felt like the room was never built to hold me without breaking me. It was built, it felt very much like to contain me, to diminish and to silence me. That's how I felt at the time. And I refused to shrink in. I wasn't going to let my mental health suffer any more than it did. And instead, I chose to rise, to shine, and to leave on my own terms. And I've continued to build and to journey from there. And I use that experience to help other women to rise, to shine above those obstacles, and to just shine in their brilliance.
It's inspirational. I mean, you talked about your father. You talked about your both your parents, your grandmother, and what you talk about here is inspiring others. But what inspires, what or who inspires you or has inspired you? Because it can't just all be built on resilience. I'm sure you'll be inspired by others as well. Who inspires you, and how do you inspire others, other than what you just shared with us?
Uh, So I have to go back to my foundation, which you've alluded to, my parents,
Mm,
my grandparents, and the Windrush, and those in the Windrush area, really understanding the story of Windrush,
mm,
and what that generation came through. And actually, if it wasn't for that generation and what they went through, they paved the way for many of us to be who we are today. So my parents is one, my faith. So I'm a Christian, and my faith really anchors my leadership style, and it reminds me that actually what I'm in service to do. It reminds me about, my values around compassion and integrity, which for me are non-negotiable. And I draw some of my inspiration from biblical figures such as Ruth and Esther, who were women who defied the odds and fulfilled their purpose through adversity. And it is around people who overcome adversity, everyday people. I'm talking about not necessarily famous names, but everyday people who, despite barriers, who are managing to rise through the odds. My own personal journey, of course, when I look back and reflect, and sometimes I do think, wow, look how far we've come, but there's still more to go. But it's really important that I know that my story can help others break through the glass ceiling. So the way that I hopefully inspire others is through that authentic storytelling. I am quite open about sharing my struggles, as well as really open about, of course, sharing my victories, the times where things did go amazingly well, and there are those times. And really, it's important that through my stories, through my storytelling, kind of showing people that leadership is not about perfection. It's about persistence and self-belief. So, it's really important that I create spaces and that we create spaces for others to shine, which I do through my coaching, through some of the workshops, through my role as a non-executive director in an NHS organisation, intentionally creating opportunities for voices that are often silenced. And I think most importantly, being a role model, living my values and modeling those values, demonstrating leadership at every point, I think is really important. So, inspiration, as I said, is not about being perfect, inspiring people. It's about showing others, I think, what's possible.
Yeah. You mentioned your Christian faith, which is something that we share, and you've talked about how it inspires you as well, and how you how does your Christian faith contribute to your leadership style? How does that come out practically? Is there anything that
Yes.
there?
My Christian faith is integral, like we've heard
Mm,
that phrase, like a stick of rock. It's been my foundation in my leadership style. And it gives me that moral compass and has kept me grounded in terms of my values. I talked about, values of compassion, integrity, justice. And for me, leadership is never just about the role or the title. It's really about how you serve others and create space for them. And when I think about my Christian faith, I'll describe my approach as servant leadership because my faith reminds me that true leadership is not about power. It really is not about power, it's about how we serve others. And that means, for me, listening deeply, making decisions with fairness, creating opportunities for people that may otherwise have been overlooked. My faith has carried me through when it's been dark, when it has been incredibly challenging. So, whether that be personal, whether that be through health struggles, family issues, career,
mm,
but it's helped me through those dark times, and it has kept me calm and has really kept me grounded. So for me, my faith doesn't just influence how I lead, but it's really influenced who I am as a leader.
right. Yeah. Interesting. And I mean, you talk about servant leadership. You've dedicated your life to service, and then in 2024, I mentioned this earlier a couple of times. It led to you being awarded an MBE, and presented by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. I mean, I suspect there's not many people listening to this podcast or watching this podcast who have experienced the same. So tell us a bit more about how that happened and what was it like, and what was he like?
Yes, thank you for that. Um, Being awarded an MBE by the Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, was an incredibly emotional, but an incredibly humbling experience. It's that experience that says, well, somebody like me who came from humble beginnings should receive such an award. And I remember when I first read the letter, well, actually, what happened was I received a telephone call, sorry, and from somebody who said, it's the cabinet office here. And I thought, yes. They said, have you received an email from us? I said, a letter. I said, no. And they said, well, there's a letter attached to this email. Please read it and respond. And so that was the letter. That was the first notification that I had been awarded an MBE, and I needed to respond um, whether or not I was going to accept that. And of course, I accepted it. For me, it wasn't just about recognizing my service to nursing or to leadership. It really felt like an acknowledgement of the obstacles that I'd faced, but an acknowledgement of also the communities that I represent.
Mm,
And I remember walking into Windsor Castle. I took my husband, my daughter, and two of my in-laws. And I remember walking into Windsor Castle. It's the first time I'd been there, and it's this amazing building. Yeah,
mm,
the sun was shining, it was beautiful. And meeting Prince William was amazing. But hearing my name read out was surreal. There was one other woman in that room who looked like me. And in that moment, I thought about my parents. I thought about and their journey. I thought about those teachers who said that I would never make anything of myself. And I thought about the countless patients and colleagues and those leaders that I'd worked with through the years. I thought about my passion for equity, my passion for justice. And in particular, I thought about the Windrush era. And so, yes, it was an honor, but more than that, it was that real reminder around why I do what I do, why I was so passionate to ensure that actually everybody receives equitable care, everybody has a good outcome, everybody has a good experience, there are opportunities for everybody. And so it was a reminder, and it really helped me to stay true to my values. So receiving that MBE level wasn't just for me. It really felt like it wasn't just for me. It
Mm,
was for everyone who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or excluded, and a real symbol that our brilliance can and will be recognized.
yeah. Well, congratulations on that honor. It
Thank
is
you.
truly deserved, and um, fascinating to hear kind of that encounter as well. I'm assuming it was brief, but it will stay with you for a long time, I would have thought.
It was incredibly brief, but yeah, it will stay for me a long time. It was a really deep, meaningful conversation in that brief
Yeah,
moment.
yeah, excellent. Well, it's amazing, and it's yeah, it's not something that we hear about every day, is it? So to be able to speak about this and have you on the show is yeah, it's really great. So I mean, there you are as a leader, you know, being honoured by another leader in his own right. Um, what is leadership to you? We haven't really spoken about that. What is leadership to you, and how do you define it?
Leadership for me is being able to take people with you. It's being able to see the vision in the midst of everything, being able to see the vision, hold the vision, and in being able to take people with you. And that's taking everybody with you, irrespective of their role, irrespective of where they have come from. And it's about being in service to others for others in terms of that bigger picture. So leadership isn't about me. It's not about my journey, although my journey has helped me to get to where I have been. But it really is about being in service for others. And I think I've kind of alluded to that
Mm,
throughout this conversation. So it's my ability to take people with me towards that bigger picture. It's my ability to help and support others to see and acknowledge the greatness within them and how they contribute as well to that bigger picture.
mm. And what advice do you have for people who are currently in leadership, or perhaps aspiring to be in leadership, but maybe struggling with obstacles, with, you know, situations they encounter? What advice can you share from your experience?
I think my first piece of advice is not to underestimate the power of self-awareness. So, really understanding who it is that you are, and I talked about that a little bit earlier, but taking time to reflect on who you are, not just what you do. And when you begin to understand your own values and your strengths and even your limitation, you can begin to lead, you can begin to operate, you can begin to operate with true authenticity. And that's what people want. I think, secondly, it's to remember that challenges and obstacles are not a sign of failure. They're part of all of our journey, our life journey, and our career journey. And every setback that I've faced, from being the only Black person, Black woman in the senior rooms, to navigating the microaggressions, health struggles, has taught me a lot, has taught me to be courageous, has taught me to be bold, and has really taught me the importance of finding my own voice. And I'm not sure of the originator of this quote. I think it was Lisa Nichols who said, it wasn't my circumstances that affected my spirits, but actually how I chose to respond to them that really stole my joy. So, in other words, it's really important to remember that, we have choices and how we respond,
Mm.
and and to recognize those choices. I think the other thing that's really important that has really carried me through is around seeking support. So too often leaders think that they must carry everything alone, that they have to find all the solutions alone, that they have to be strong. So it's really important to surround yourself with mentors, with sponsors, with coaches, with peers who can offer a different perspective, with peers who can challenge you and encourage you, and that really to understand leadership is not a solo act.
Mm.
And I think my final point would have to be around embracing difference. So, whether that's your own uniqueness, your own difference, or the diversity that's within your teams, because that's where innovation and transformation truly comes from. So, my advice is to lead with self awareness, would be to treat obstacles as lessons, never walk the leadership journey alone. Don't be afraid to stand out because it's in that brilliance is where we shine. It's where the innovation happens.
Wise word from somebody who's been there and done that and is still doing it. It's a truly inspirational and wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you being on. We're not quite done yet, but we still got the virtually anything goes question as well. But yeah, everything you've shared has been insightful for me. I think it's been really helpful for me to hear, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody else watching this and listening to this as well. So I really appreciate you sharing your personal story, your insights, your advice, and giving us an insight into how you've progressed and how you've dealt with different situations. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. So the virtually anything goes question. This is, if you're new to this podcast, it's where I turn control over to my guest, in this case, Jacynth, and she can ask me any question she wants. It doesn't have to be related to what we talked about today. I don't know what that question is, so it is entirely new to me. I do have to answer it no matter what it is, but I do have a safety net. After I've given my answer, I will then ask Jacynth the same question as well. So I'm ready. Please tell me what your virtually anything goes question is.
Liv, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my story. And my anything goes questions is kind of related to that, really, because I've shared around some of my obstacles and limitation and barriers, and I'm sure everybody's had those. And my question is, if there were no obstacles and barriers, if limitations, any form of limitation, if they didn't exist, what bold move would you make tomorrow?
Oh, great question. I'm assuming you'll accept personal or professional, or is it just professional, or is it anything?
That's not professional. You decide.
If there were no limitations,
Yes. What
great question.
bold move would you make tomorrow? I'm really excited to hear
Yeah,
this.
well, so am I. I need to think about what it could possibly be, because I'm sure there's more than one thing I can think of. Um, wow. You might have to edit this down a little bit, this pause, because it's there are so many thoughts flying through my head, and I've never actually thought about that question before. So thank you for asking it. I might have to break this down into personal and professional, and it probably marries up somewhere as well. But I love my work, and in fact, my wife the other day said, after we came back from holiday, she said, you never seem to be frustrated by having to go back to work. You really like what you do, don't you? And I said, yes, I do. So I do enjoy it, and she's always joked, I can never see you retiring, because you just seem to enjoy work too much. Not in the sense that I'm never at home, but I do enjoy it when I'm here. But at the same time, to be able to, without limitation, spend time on necessarily not work-related things, family, while the children are growing up, being there and present. And I'm sure at some point they'll probably tell me to go back to work and leave them to do their things. But, to have no limitation, to be able to spend time on things that aren't necessarily the work that pays the bills. I'm a trustee for a charity. Love to spend more time on that and help there. I'd love to spend more time, obviously, with my family and the children as they grow up, and spend more time traveling and doing all those things. I think that typically we have in mind that if I won the lottery tomorrow, kind of thing, and be more, I guess, serve more, actually. Coming back to what you said, it's whether it's through our church, whether it's through the charity aspect, all those things. That there are so many things that need to be done and can be done in this world. I think that is definitely a big thing, and at the same time, I look at my work and I think there's so many things I still want to do there as well, and companies we want to work with, things we want to do, things we want to provide, that we feel really passionately about. And if there was no limitation and there was a queue at the door of companies saying, give us all your most innovative services and things and thoughts, I would love to spend time on that, because it interests me, it fascinates me, it brings me joy as well, and I know it does for the team as well. So it is really hard, because if there was literally no limitations, there's just too much to do. But I think ultimately at the base foundation of all of this, I guess, is serving. It's not consuming. It's not it's not hedonistically on the beach and cocktails, and I mean that would be lovely. I'm sure that would be part of it. But I think at the foundation it would be serving more. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. There was so much in there, but thank you as a real kind of authentic answer and authentic response to that.
Yeah,
So I guess
thank you for
you're
asking
going
the
to ask
question.
me
Yes, absolutely. No limitations,
the,
Jacynth.
the
What's
the
the bold
same
move?
question.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. There was so much in what you said that resonated with me, Lev. Yes, I've had a life of ups and downs and twists and turns, and I always say through it all, I've not only survived but thrived. I too love life. Um, I love my journey, irrespective of the fact that some of it has been a little bit dark. And I love my journey, and I look back on that because that has shaped who I am today. Um, and so sometimes those limitations I kind of see have shaped me. Yes, they have shaped me. So perhaps I don't want them not to have
Mm,
existed. So it may start off as a strange response. Um, but and I feel I've really learned. And I talk about I'm here to serve. And so I'd really love to be able to take my message of being courageous, being bold, being resilient, of really supporting people to transform the way that they live their lives, transform the way that organizations work, but to be able to do that globally, particularly with underserved communities. Really want to be able to reach women. And I feel that this is my mission and purpose. And as a Christian, we're often kind of, exploring. So what is our purpose in life? What has God put us on this earth to do? Which isn't about, kind of earning money and collating things. And for me, is about reaching those women who are often unseen and unheard, supporting those leaders everywhere to break through whatever it is that they need to break through. So whether that's breaking through glass ceilings in terms of their leadership roles, or whether that is actually breaking through the day-to-day realities of poverty, of social exclusion, and some of those challenges. And I've had some amazing mentors along the way, and amazing coaches who have supported me through work life, through my spiritual life, through my life in terms of my relationship and children. And so my passion is to be able to support others along their journey. Yes. So
mm,
that's the bold move, is to support others along their journey wherever they may be. And I suppose the other thing is, no, I don't want to. I want to lay on a beach, of course I do. Um, but I also think that unapologetically take time out for me, because actually in taking out time out for me to rest, renew, I can be of greater service to others.
Mm.
So I need to recognize that actually I need to take time out for me to recharge, so that I unapologetically, so that I can be in service to others.
Mm.
And so that's what I would do. And that's my aim, and that's what I will do.
Excellent. That sounds great. And I suppose the follow-on question would be, which we don't have time for today, but what are the limitations that are preventing us from doing all these things? But maybe that's another one for another time.
Yeah.
But no,
Time.
that's great. It was really wonderful to hear, and thank you for asking that question. And I also have to say a big thank you to Chelsea Baker, who recommended I speak to you, bring you onto the podcast. She's a previous guest on this podcast and spoke about mentoring, and she put us in touch. So thank you, Chelsea, as well. If you're watching, thank you very much. Jacynth, it's been a really fascinating and inspiring conversation. I really appreciate your time that you spent with us, that you shared with us. And I'm delighted you were with us here today. So I really appreciate it. I wanted to say a big thank you to you. And also, of course, thank you to our audience for watching this, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody that you think would also enjoy it. And of course, check out our other episodes on other topics with other leaders and a variety of other things. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, for listening. And Justin, thank you very much for being here. And we'll speak to you very soon and see you on another episode very soon too. Thank you. Take care.